The dust billowed across the trail like angry ghosts as Sarah Evanston struggled to take another step forward. Her cracked lips burned with thirst, her vision blurring as the merciless Wyoming sun beat down on her unprotected head. 3 days without water, 2 weeks on the run, and now her strength had finally abandoned her. As the ground rushed up to meet her, Sarah's last conscious thought was that perhaps death wouldn't be so terrible after all. Thomas Quinn spotted the woman's collapse from a quarter-mile away. He'd been tracking a stray calf when movement on the eastern trail caught his eye, a figure walking unsteadily, then suddenly pitching forward into the dirt. Spurring his stallion forward, he covered the distance in minutes, dismounting before the horse had fully stopped. The woman lay face down in the dirt, her threadbare dress torn and stained with the evidence of a desperate journey. Her bonnet had fallen away, revealing matted auburn hair streaked with dust. Thomas knelt beside her, gently turning her over. Despite the grime and exhaustion etched into her features, he could see she was young, perhaps 25, with a delicate face that had once been beautiful before hardship had carved its mark. "Miss, can you hear me?" Thomas reached for his canteen, wetting his bandana before pressing it to her parched lips. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. Making a quick decision, Thomas gathered the unconscious woman into his arms. As he lifted her toward his horse, he felt how alarmingly light she was, like lifting a child instead of a grown woman. "Your struggle ends today," he said quietly as he settled her across his saddle. "Whatever you're running from, you're safe now." Green River, Wyoming territory, was still 3 miles east, but Thomas's ranch lay just over the next ridge. With the woman's condition so grave, he knew he couldn't risk the extra time to reach town. Mounting behind her, Thomas cradled her limp form against his chest and headed for home. The year was 1878, and Thomas Quinn had carved his ranch from the wild Wyoming territory through 7 years of backbreaking labor. At 32, he had what most men in the West considered success: 2,000 acres, a growing herd of cattle, and a sturdy 2-room cabin he'd built with his own hands. What he didn't have was company beyond his ranch hand, Miguel, and the occasional visits from neighbors miles away. As Thomas's cabin came into view, he called out to Miguel, who emerged from the stable with a look of surprise. "Boss, who's that you got there?" Found her collapsed on the eastern trail, looks half dead from thirst and exhaustion. "Ready my bed and fetch some of that willow bark tea your mother taught us to make." Miguel hurried ahead, pushing open the cabin door and quickly preparing the small bedroom while Thomas carried the woman inside. He laid her gently on his bed, then stepped back as Miguel brought in a basin of water and clean cloths. "I'll tend to the horses," Miguel said, understanding Thomas would want privacy for the unconscious woman. "Should I ride for Doc Miller in Green River?" Thomas assessed the woman's breathing, which seemed to be steadying. "Not yet. Let's see if we can bring her around first. Could be just exhaustion and thirst." After Miguel left, Thomas hesitated. The woman needed care, but propriety demanded caution. Finally, practicality won. He removed her boots, finding her feet blistered and bloody. He wetted a cloth and wiped the dust from her face, then moistened her lips with water, careful not to give her too much at once. "Come on now," he murmured. "Let's see those eyes." As if hearing his command, the woman's eyelids fluttered open, revealing eyes of startling emerald green. Fear instantly flooded those eyes as she registered a stranger looming over her. "Don't be afraid," Thomas said, raising his hands and stepping back. "You collapsed on the trail. I brought you to my ranch. You're safe here." The woman tried to speak but produced only a dry croak. Thomas carefully helped her sip from a cup of water, slow now, not too much at once. After a few small sips, she found her voice. Where am I? My ranch, about 3 miles west of Green River. I'm Thomas Quinn. He kept his voice gentle, noting how she flinched at every movement. Might I know your name, miss? She hesitated, wariness evident in her expression. Sarah Evanston. Well, Miss Evanston, you look like you've had a rough journey. Where were you headed? Sarah's eyes darted to the door, as if calculating her chances of escape. Anywhere. Away. Thomas nodded, recognizing the look of someone hunted. He'd seen it before in men on the run from the law, but somehow he doubted this woman was an outlaw. Whatever you're running from, you're safe for now. Rest. We can figure things out when you're stronger. Sarah's body relaxed slightly, though her eyes remained vigilant. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Thomas, please. He stood, moving toward the door. I'll leave you to rest. Call out if you need anything. I'll be just in the other room. Thomas stepped out, closing the door behind him. Miguel looked up from where he was stoking the fire in the main room. She awake? Barely. Says her name is Sarah Evanston. She's running from something, that much is clear. Miguel crossed himself. Poor woman. Will she recover? I think so. Needs rest, food, and water more than anything. Thomas moved to the window, staring out at the setting sun. Keep an eye out for strangers. I've got a feeling whoever she's running from might come looking. Inside the bedroom, Sarah fought against the pull of exhaustion. She needed to keep moving to put more distance between herself and St. Louis. But her body betrayed her, sinking deeper into the unexpected comfort of a real bed. Despite her fear, one thought offered comfort as she drifted off the gentle voice of the stranger who had promised her safety, and the words he'd spoken on the trail that echoed in her mind. Your struggle ends today. The first rays of dawn filtered through the cabin's small window when Sarah finally opened her eyes again. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was, panic rising in her chest, until the previous day's events came rushing back. She was in a stranger's cabin, a cowboy named Thomas Quinn, who had found her collapsed on the trail. Testing her limbs, Sarah found herself weak but no longer at death's door. The desperate thirst had abated, and someone had tended to her blistered feet while she slept, wrapping them in soft cloth. The cabin was quiet, with only the distant sounds of livestock filtering through the walls. Sarah pushed herself up against the rough-hewn headboard, wincing at her body's protests. A clean dress had been laid across the foot of the bed, obviously not made for her, as it would be several sizes too large, but clean nonetheless. Beside it sat a basin of fresh water, a bar of soap that smelled faintly of pine, and a small hand mirror. The face that greeted her in the mirror was barely recognizable. Her once lustrous auburn hair hung in matted clumps, her skin was wind-burned and peeling, and her cheeks had hollowed from weeks of insufficient food. Sarah had never considered herself vain, but the transformation from the pampered banker's daughter to this wild-looking creature brought tears to her eyes. A gentle knock at the door interrupted her self-pity. Miss Evanston, Thomas's voice came through the wood. Are you awake? I've brought some breakfast. Sarah hastily wiped her tears. Yes, I'm awake. Please give me a moment. She quickly washed her face and hands in the basin, wishing she could do more about her appearance but knowing it would have to suffice. You can come in now. The door opened slowly, revealing Thomas carrying a tray laden with steaming porridge, a small pot of honey, and a cup of coffee. Behind him stood a younger man with dark hair and a kind face. This is Miguel Vasquez, Thomas explained, setting the tray on a small table beside the bed. He helps me run the ranch. Miguel tipped his hat. Pleased to meet you, señorita. I am glad to see you awake. Sarah managed a small smile. Thank you both for your kindness. We'll leave you to eat in peace, Thomas said. That dress belonged to my sister when she visited last year. It might be large, but it's clean. There's a comb in the drawer if you'd like to use it." After they left, Sarah ate slowly, savoring each bite of the simple meal. It was the first hot food she'd had in weeks, and despite its plainness, it tasted better than any fancy dinner she'd been served in her father's house. Once finished, she attempted to make herself presentable. The dress, as expected, hung on her frame, but with some strategic folding and pinning, she managed to make it serviceable. Her hair proved a greater challenge, tangled beyond the ability of a simple comb to remedy. But she did her best, finally braiding it to hide the worst of the damage. When she emerged from the bedroom, she found Thomas alone in the main room, whittling a piece of wood by the fireplace. He stood immediately, his tall frame making the cabin seem suddenly smaller. "You look much improved," he said, his blue eyes taking in her appearance with undisguised approval. "How do you feel?" "Better, thank you." Sarah remained near the bedroom door, unsure of her footing in this strange place. "I don't know how to repay your kindness." Thomas waved away her words. "No repayment necessary. Anyone would have done the same." "Not everyone," Sarah replied quietly, memories of her journey flashing through her mind, the leering men offering help with strings attached. The doors closed in her face when she sought shelter. Thomas seemed to understand her meaning. He gestured to a chair by the fire. "Would you like to sit?" "You shouldn't be on those feet more than necessary." Sarah nodded, crossing the room carefully and sinking into the offered chair. The fire's warmth was comforting after so many cold nights spent outdoors. "If you don't mind my asking," Thomas said, resuming his seat across from her, "what brings a lady like you to collapse on a trail in the middle of Wyoming territory? Your accent tells me you're not from around here." Sarah studied his face, weighing how much to reveal. His features were weathered by sun and wind, but honest. His beard was neatly trimmed, his brown hair curling slightly where it touched his collar. Most striking were his eyes, clear blue and direct, but kind. "I'm from St. Louis," she finally said. "I left, in a hurry. I had planned to take the train further west, but my funds were stolen in Cheyenne. I've been walking since then, taking odd jobs where I could find them. St. Louis to Green River is a mighty long way to be traveling alone, especially on foot." Thomas's tone wasn't accusatory, merely concerned. Sarah looked down at her hands. "I had no choice." Thomas nodded, not pressing further. "Well, you're welcome to stay here until you're recovered. After that, we can figure out your next steps. I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. Miguel's mother is coming to visit next week. She can stay with you in the cabin for propriety's sake, and I'll bunk in the stable until then." He smiled slightly. "Unless you'd prefer to go into town. The hotel in Green River is modest but clean." The thought of being in town, visible to anyone passing through, sent a wave of anxiety through Sarah. "If it truly isn't an imposition, I'd prefer to stay here at least until I'm stronger. Then it's settled." Thomas returned to his whittling. "Rest today. Tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it, Miguel's wife Alina might be willing to come help you with womanly things." He gestured vaguely toward her hair, a slight flush coloring his tan cheeks. Sarah couldn't help but smile at his discomfort. "That would be most welcome, thank you." The day passed quietly. Sarah dozed by the fire, still recovering from her ordeal, while Thomas moved in and out of the cabin, attending to ranch work. By evening, she felt strong enough to insist on helping prepare the simple dinner of beans, bacon, and cornbread. As they ate with Miguel, who regaled them with stories of his homeland in Mexico, Sarah found herself relaxing for the first time in months. The comfortable domesticity of the scene, so different from the formal, stilted dinners of her past life, warmed something inside her that had nothing to do with the hearty food. That night, despite Thomas's protests, Sarah insisted he keep his bed while she took a pallet by the fire. As she lay listening to the night sounds of the ranch, so different from city noises, she realized she hadn't thought about her pursuers all day. The constant fear that had been her companion for weeks had, at least temporarily, receded. "Your struggle ends today," Thomas had said when he found her. Perhaps, just perhaps, he had been right. The next morning, Elena Vasquez arrived shortly after breakfast. A small, energetic woman with a warm smile and capable hands, she took one look at Sarah and declared, "Dios mío, we have work to do, señorita." Over the next few hours, Elena transformed Sarah from a bedraggled runaway into something closer to her former self. After heating water for a proper bath behind a screen in the bedroom, Elena worked a miracle with Sarah's tangled hair, using a special oil to gently comb through the knots until it shone once more. She then altered one of her own dresses to fit Sarah's thinner frame, tusking over how bony the young woman had become. "My husband says you collapsed on the trail," Elena said as she worked. "You must have been very desperate to travel alone." Sarah tensed, but Elena patted her shoulder reassuringly. "No need to explain to me, chica. We all have our reasons for the journeys we take." She secured the last stitch on the dress. "There. Now you look like a lady again." When Sarah emerged from the bedroom in the fitted blue calico dress, her hair clean and neatly braided, Thomas stopped in the doorway of the cabin, his mouth slightly agape. He had returned from checking fence lines, his clothes dusty and his face sweaty, making Sarah suddenly conscious of how much better she looked. "Miss Evanston," he finally said, removing his hat. "You look human again," Sarah suggested with a small smile. "Beautiful," Thomas finished, then immediately looked embarrassed at his forwardness. "I mean, you look well. The rest has done you good." Elena exchanged a knowing look with Miguel, who had entered behind Thomas. "I will come again tomorrow," she announced. "Perhaps we can work on another dress, yes. A woman needs more than one." After the Vasquezes left, an awkward silence fell between Sarah and Thomas. He busied himself washing up outside while Sarah prepared vegetables for dinner, each hyper-aware of the other's presence. "Mr. Quinn," Sarah finally said when Thomas returned, "I wanted to thank you properly, not just for rescuing me, but for not asking questions I'm not ready to answer." Thomas leaned against the doorframe, studying her. "Everyone out here has a past, Miss Evanston. Some are running to something, some from something. It's not my place to judge either way. Please call me Sarah." "Then I'm Thomas." He moved to help her with dinner preparations, "though most folks around here call me Tom." As they worked side by side, Sarah found herself relaxing in his presence. There was something steadying about Thomas Quinn, as if he were a fixed point in a world that had spun wildly out of control. "Have you always been a rancher?" she asked, curious about the man who had saved her life. Thomas shook his head. "I came west after the war, fought for the Union, tried my hand at prospecting, freight driving, even worked as a deputy in Cheyenne for a spell, but I always wanted land of my own." His eyes took on a distant look. "My father was a tenant farmer back in Pennsylvania. Never owned the soil he worked. I swore I'd do better." "And you have," Sarah observed, looking around the sturdy cabin. "You've built something significant here. It's a start." Thomas smiled. "Another few years I hope to build a proper house. This cabin was only meant to be temporary." The idea of building for the future, something Sarah had taken for granted until her world collapsed, struck her with unexpected force. How long had it been since she'd thought beyond survival? That evening they ate dinner on the small porch, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming landscape in gold and crimson. Sarah found herself sharing small, safe details about her life in St. Louis, her love of reading, her fondness for music, the garden she had tended behind her father's house. Thomas listened attentively, asking questions that revealed his own intelligence and curiosity. As darkness fell, he lit a lantern, its glow creating a small circle of warmth against the vast night. "You miss it?" he asked. "City life?" Sarah considered the question. "I miss certain comforts," she admitted. "Hot baths whenever I want them, libraries, concerts." She looked up at the star-filled sky, so much clearer here than in the city. "But there's a beauty to this place that St. Louis could never match." "That there is," Thomas agreed, his gaze fixed not on the stars but on her face. For 5 days, Sarah's strength returned under the careful ministrations of Alina and the hearty meals Thomas prepared. Each day brought new revelations about ranch life, the rhythms of the cattle, the relationships with neighboring ranchers, the constant battle against weather and predators. Sarah found herself increasingly fascinated by this world so different from her own. Thomas, for his part, seemed to enjoy explaining his work to someone who asked intelligent questions. When she expressed interest in the accounts he labored over one evening, he readily showed her his system for tracking expenses and profits, admitting with a self-deprecating smile that numbers had never been his strong suit. "I could help with that," Sarah offered, then hesitated. "That is, while I'm here." The reminder of her temporary status dampened the mood momentarily. "I'd appreciate that," Thomas said after a moment, "but only if you're fully recovered. You're still looking a bit peaked to my eye." The truth was, Sarah could have continued her journey after just a few days' rest, but something kept her at the Quinn ranch. Perhaps it was fear of what awaited her if she continued west, or perhaps it was the increasing comfort she felt in Thomas's company. Whatever the reason, she found herself making excuses to extend her stay, and Thomas seemed in no hurry to see her leave. On the 6th day, everything changed. Thomas had ridden out at dawn to check on a pregnant heifer, leaving Sarah to help Alina with laundry. The women were hanging sheets on a line behind the cabin, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made them both turn. 3 riders approached from the direction of Green River, dust clouds rising behind their horses as they pushed the animals hard. Something about their purposeful advance sent a chill through Sarah. "Alina," she said quietly, "please go inside. Now." The older woman looked at her questioningly but obeyed, hurrying into the cabin. Sarah remained frozen by the clothesline, her heart pounding as the riders drew near enough for her to see their faces. She recognized the man in front, instantly James Blackwell, her father's business partner and her former fiancé. The 2 men flanking him were strangers, but their hard faces and the way they carried their guns suggested they weren't there for a social call. Panic rose in Sarah's throat. How had they found her? She'd been so careful to cover her tracks after Cheyenne. "Well, well," Blackwell called as they reined in before her. "If it isn't the runaway bride herself, you've led us on quite a chase, Sarah." Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to show fear despite the trembling in her knees. "What do you want, James?" Blackwell dismounted, his expensive Eastern clothes looking out of place against the rugged Wyoming backdrop. At 45, he was 20 years Sarah's senior, his once handsome face now hardened by ambition and cruelty. "What do I want?" he repeated with a cold smile. "I want what's rightfully mine, you, and the documents you stole." "I stole nothing that wasn't already mine," Sarah replied, backing toward the cabin. "My father's ledger belongs to me, his only heir. Your father was a fool who didn't understand business." Blackwell's facade of civility slipped. "He left me no choice but to protect our investments. Now be a good girl and get your things. We're returning to St. Louis." "I'm not going anywhere with you." Sarah's voice was steadier than she felt. "I know what you did. The ledger proves it," Blackwell's eyes hardened. I'm not asking, Sarah. Your little adventure ends today. The irony of his words, so similar yet so different from Thomas's when he found her, was not lost on Sarah. One man had offered salvation, the other threatened captivity. The cabin door opened behind her and Alina stepped out, a shotgun in her hands. "The señorita says she is not going," she declared, raising the weapon. "I suggest you listen." Blackwell laughed, unimpressed. "Put that down before you hurt yourself, woman. My men will have you dead before you can pull the trigger." His companions drew their pistols, aiming at Alina, who didn't flinch. "Please," Sarah begged her. "Go back inside. This isn't your fight." "Any threat to a guest of the Quinn Ranch is my fight," Alina replied firmly. The standoff might have ended in bloodshed if not for the sound of more hoofbeats approaching from the west. All eyes turned to see Thomas galloping toward them, his rifle drawn. Behind him rode Miguel, similarly armed. Thomas took in the scene at a glance: the armed men, Sarah's terrified face, Alina with the shotgun, and his expression hardened to granite. He dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping his rifle trained on Blackwell. "This is private property," he said, his voice deadly calm. "State your business or leave." Blackwell straightened his jacket, switching tactics smoothly. "My name is James Blackwell from St. Louis. I've come to retrieve my fiancée who has been unwell. Her father's death affected her mind, I'm afraid." Sarah stepped forward, anger overcoming fear. "He's lying. This man murdered my father and tried to force me to marry him to cover up his crimes. I fled with proof of his embezzlement." Thomas didn't take his eyes off Blackwell, but his next words were directed at Sarah. "Is that what you've been running from?" "Yes," she admitted. "My father discovered James was stealing from their bank. Before he could expose him, he died suddenly, poisoned, I believe, though it was ruled natural causes. James then pressured me to marry him immediately. When I found my father's hidden ledger documenting the thefts, I realized the danger I was in and fled." Blackwell's pleasant mask slipped further. "The ravings of a hysterical woman. I have official papers declaring me her guardian until our marriage." He reached inside his coat. "Keep your hand where I can see it," Thomas warned, raising his rifle slightly. "You're interfering in matters that don't concern you, Cowboy," Blackwell snarled. "The law is on my side." "Not in Wyoming territory, it ain't." Thomas didn't blink. "Out here, a woman speaks for herself. If Sarah says she's not going with you, then she's not going." The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Sarah could see Blackwell calculating his options, his men shifting uneasily as they noted Miguel's steady aim. "This isn't over," Blackwell finally said. "I'll return with the sheriff." "You do that," Thomas replied evenly. "Sheriff Wilson's having dinner with us tomorrow. I'm sure he'd be mighty interested to hear about bank fraud and murder back east." Something in Thomas's unwavering confidence made Blackwell hesitate. Without the element of surprise and facing armed opponents, his position was weaker than he'd expected. "We'll settle this another way," he said, remounting his horse. "Sarah, you're only delaying the inevitable. That ledger won't help you without your father's testimony." "Perhaps," Sarah replied, finding courage in Thomas's steady presence beside her. "But I think the St. Louis newspapers would find it interesting reading nonetheless." Blackwell's face darkened with rage, but he controlled himself with visible effort. "This isn't the last you'll see of me." With a gesture to his men, he wheeled his horse around and rode off toward Green River, dust billowing in his wake. As soon as they disappeared from view, Sarah's legs gave way. Thomas caught her before she hit the ground, his strong arms supporting her as she trembled with delayed shock. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I've brought danger to your home." "Hush now," Thomas said, guiding her to the porch steps. You've nothing to be sorry for." Elena brought water while Miguel kept watch, ensuring Blackwell and his men truly left. Thomas sat beside Sarah, his solid presence anchoring her as she fought to regain her composure. "I should have told you," she said finally. "You deserve to know what kind of trouble I was in." "Would you tell me now?" Thomas asked gently. "The full story." Sarah nodded, realizing she wanted him to know, needed him to understand. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, she explained how her father, Edmund Evanston, had built a respected bank in St. Louis, taking on James Blackwell as a partner 10 years earlier. How Blackwell had courted her despite their age difference, pressing for marriage which her father had delayed, wanting her to be certain. How she had discovered, too late, that Blackwell had been systematically embezzling from wealthy clients, using the stolen funds to build his own investments while falsifying the bank's records. When father confronted him privately, he suddenly fell ill that very night, Sarah continued, her voice hollow with the memory. The doctor called it heart failure, but father had never had heart problems. Before he died, he whispered to me about a secret ledger hidden in his study, the real accounts, showing what Blackwell had stolen. Thomas listened intently, his face grave. "And after your father's death," Blackwell moved quickly. "As father's partner, he took control of the bank. As my suitor, he declared himself my protector. He arranged everything, the funeral, the will reading, all of it designed to push me toward immediate marriage." Sarah's hands twisted in her lap. "I played along while secretly searching for the ledger father mentioned. When I found it, I realized Blackwell would never let me live if I exposed him, so I ran." "Brave," Thomas said quietly. "That took real courage." Sarah shook her head. "I was terrified. I took what money I could and fled west, thinking I could lose myself in the territories. I made it to Cheyenne before my purse was stolen with most of my remaining funds. After that," she gestured helplessly, "you know the rest." Thomas was silent for a long moment, absorbing her story. Finally, he said, "The ledger, do you still have it?" Sarah nodded. "It's sewn into the lining of the carpet bag you found with me. It's all I have left. Then we need to get it somewhere safe and find someone who can act on the information." Thomas stood, his decision made. "Tomorrow we'll ride into Green River and speak with Sheriff Wilson. He has connections with federal marshals who can help." "You believe me?" Sarah asked, surprised at his immediate acceptance. Thomas looked down at her, his blue eyes serious. "I've gotten pretty good at reading people in my time, Sarah Evanston. You're no liar." His expression softened. "Besides, a woman doesn't nearly kill herself walking across Wyoming territory, unless she's running from something genuinely threatening." That night, Thomas insisted on sleeping in the main room rather than the stable, his rifle close at hand in case Blackwell decided to return under cover of darkness. Sarah lay awake in the bedroom, her mind racing with fear and, unexpectedly, hope. For the first time since her father's death, she wasn't facing her problems alone. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with no sign of Blackwell or his men. After a quick breakfast, Thomas helped Sarah mount a gentle mare from his small stable. "Elena and Miguel will stay here," he explained as they rode toward Green River. "They'll keep watch and send word to neighboring ranches about our unwelcome visitors." Green River was a growing settlement straddling the river from which it took its name. Though small compared to eastern cities, it boasted a respectable main street with several businesses, a church, and a squat stone building that served as the sheriff's office. Thomas helped Sarah dismount in front of the building, his hand lingering on her waist a moment longer than strictly necessary. The brief touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, despite the seriousness of their errand. Sheriff Wilson proved to be a grizzled man in his 50s, with shrewd eyes that missed nothing as Sarah recounted her story. When she finished, he pulled thoughtfully at his mustache. "That's quite a tale, Miss Evanston. Mind if I see this ledger you risked so much to protect?" Sarah retrieved the small book from its hiding place in her bag, handing it over with reluctance. The sheriff paged through it slowly, his expression growing increasingly grave. "I ain't no banker," he finally said, "but even I can see these numbers don't add up right. Names of folks I recognize, two important people who wouldn't take kindly to having their money stolen." "Then you'll help us?" Thomas asked. Sheriff Wilson nodded. "Federal marshals have been tracking bank fraud across the territories. This could be connected to cases they're already building." He closed the ledger carefully. "I'll send a telegram to Marshal Dawson in Cheyenne today. In the meantime," he eyed Sarah seriously, "you'd best stay out of sight, Miss Evanston. If what you say about this Blackwell fella is true, he won't give up easily." "She can continue staying at my ranch," Thomas said. "It's defensible and I've got good neighbors who'll keep watch." The sheriff gave Thomas a long look. "That arrangement working out for you, Quinn?" Thomas straightened. "Elena Vasquez is staying as chaperone. Everything's proper." "Just asking," the sheriff replied with the ghost of a smile. "Town's already talking about the mystery woman at Quinn Ranch. You know how folks gossip." Sarah felt heat rising to her cheeks. She hadn't considered how their arrangement might appear to others, or how it might affect Thomas's reputation. As they left the sheriff's office, Sarah voiced her concern. "Perhaps I should stay in town. I don't want to cause you further inconvenience or misunderstandings." Thomas helped her back onto the mare. "The only inconvenience would be worrying about you being alone in town where Blackwell could get to you." His expression softened as he looked up at her. "Besides, I've grown accustomed to your company." The simple admission sent a flutter through Sarah's chest that had nothing to do with fear. During the ride back to the ranch, she found herself studying Thomas's profile against the backdrop of the rugged landscape. When had this taciturn cowboy with his quiet strength become so important to her? The next 2 weeks established a rhythm to their days that felt surprisingly natural. While they awaited word from the federal marshal, Sarah immersed herself in ranch life. She organized Thomas's chaotic accounts, revealing a more profitable operation than he'd realized. She learned to cook Western-style meals under Elena's tutelage. And each evening, she and Thomas would sit on the porch, talking long into the night about everything from books they'd read to dreams they harbored. "I always wanted to travel," Sarah admitted one evening as they watched the stars emerge. "Not just running from something, but journeying to see new places, meet different people." Thomas smiled, the lantern light catching the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "Where would you go first?" "San Francisco, perhaps, or maybe up to the mountains in Colorado, somewhere with grand vistas." She glanced at him. "What about you? If you could go anywhere?" "Never given it much thought," Thomas admitted. "Been focused on building something here." He paused, looking out at the darkened pastures. "Though I wouldn't mind seeing the ocean someday." "Which one?" Sarah asked. "Atlantic or Pacific?" "Either, both." Thomas chuckled. "Listen to us, planning adventures when there's fence posts to mend and cattle to feed." "Dreams matter too," Sarah said softly. "They're what keep us going when times are hard." Thomas turned to look at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Yes, they do at that." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words. Sarah felt herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by an invisible force. For a heartbeat, she thought he might kiss her, wanted him to kiss her, she realized with sudden clarity. Instead, Thomas cleared his throat and stood. "Getting late. We should turn in." The moment passed, leaving Sarah with a confused mix of disappointment and relief. Whatever was growing between them remained fragile, complicated by her uncertain future and the danger still lurking on the horizon. That future came into sharper focus 3 days later when Sheriff Wilson rode out to the ranch, bringing news that Marshal Dawson would arrive in Green River within the week. More significantly, he reported that Blackwell and his men had departed the territory, last seen boarding an eastbound train in Cheyenne. Marshal's telegram says your ledger connects to other cases they've been building, the sheriff explained as they sat around Thomas's table. Seems your Mr. Blackwell has been busy across several states. They're mighty interested in speaking with you, Miss Evanston. Then he's gone, truly gone. Sarah could hardly believe it could be so simple. Sheriff Wilson shrugged. For now. My guess is he's gone to cover his tracks, maybe move some money around. Men like that don't give up easily on what they consider theirs. Thomas's jaw tightened. Sarah isn't his. The sheriff gave him a measuring look before continuing. Marshal says you'll likely need to testify once they build their case. Could mean traveling back east eventually. The news should have brought only relief, but Sarah found herself glancing at Thomas, her heart conflicted. Justice for her father meant leaving Wyoming, leaving the ranch, leaving Thomas. The thought brought an unexpected ache. After the sheriff departed, Thomas was unusually quiet as he went about his evening chores. Sarah watched him from the porch, sensing his withdrawal but unsure how to breach it. Finally, as the sun set in a spectacular display of orange and purple, she approached where he was splitting wood with more force than necessary. Thomas, is something wrong? He paused mid-swing, then set the axe down carefully. Nothing's wrong. You got what you needed. Blackwell's on the run and the law's on your side now. Sarah studied his averted face. Then why do you seem upset? Thomas ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as signaling his discomfort with expressing feelings. I'm not upset, just thinking about what comes next. What do you mean? You'll testify, go back east, maybe stay there. He picked up another log, positioning it on the chopping block. It makes sense. You'll have your father's estate to manage once Blackwell's exposed. You can have your old life back. The thought had indeed crossed Sarah's mind, but hearing Thomas lay it out so matter-of-factly felt wrong somehow. I don't know that I want my old life back, she said quietly. Thomas looked up, hope and doubt warring in his expression. What do you want, Sarah? The directness of the question caught her off guard. What did she want? Security, justice for her father, yes, but also something she'd found unexpectedly in this remote Wyoming ranch: connection, purpose, and the stirrings of feelings she'd never experienced before. I want to feel safe, she began slowly. I want to see Blackwell brought to justice, but I also... She hesitated, gathering courage. I've come to care for this place, for the people here. Thomas's eyes searched hers. The people... Yes, Sarah whispered, her heart pounding. Especially one person in particular. The axe fell from Thomas's hands as he closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. His calloused hands came up to frame her face with unexpected gentleness. Sarah Evanston, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've been falling in love with you since the moment you opened those green eyes in my bed. If you're saying what I think you're saying. Sarah's answer was to rise on tiptoes, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that started tentatively, but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and weeks of growing attraction culminated in this moment of connection. When they finally parted, both breathless, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. I don't have much to offer compared to city life, he murmured. Just a small ranch and big dreams. Sarah smiled, joy bubbling up inside her. Dreams matter, remember. And your ranch doesn't seem small to me. It feels like the beginning of something wonderful. Their newfound happiness carried them through the next few days in a haze of stolen kisses and meaningful glances. Even Alina noticed the change, giving Sarah a knowing smile as she announced that perhaps she could return to her own home now that the señorita was feeling better. Marshal Dawson arrived in Green River exactly 1 week after Sheriff Wilson's visit. A tall, imposing man with a no-nonsense demeanor, he interviewed Sarah for 3 hours in the sheriff's office, taking copious notes and asking penetrating questions about her father's bank, Blackwell's operations, and the contents of the ledger. "This is excellent work, Miss Evanston," he finally declared, closing his notebook. "With this and evidence we've gathered elsewhere, we can build a solid case against Blackwell and his associates." "Then it's over?" Sarah asked hopefully. Marshal Dawson's expression turned regretful. "Not quite. We still need to apprehend him, and you'll need to testify at trial. That could be months away." "Months?" The timeline surprised her. "What should I do in the meantime?" "Stay where you are for now," the marshal advised. "Wyoming territory is outside Blackwell's usual sphere of influence. We'll send word when we need you to travel east." He hesitated, then added, "Though I should warn you, once Blackwell is arrested, news will spread. Your name will become known. You might want to consider your long-term plans." The warning cast a slight shadow over Sarah's spirits as she and Thomas rode back to the ranch. The reality of her situation hadn't changed eventually. She would need to face Blackwell and the remnants of her old life. Thomas seemed to sense her thoughts. "Whatever you decide," he said as they approached the ranch, "know that you have a place here, not just as a guest or a friend, but—" He trailed off, suddenly looking uncertain. Sarah reached across the space between their horses to touch his arm. "But what, Thomas?" He reined his horse to a stop, turning to face her fully. "I know it's fast. We've only known each other a few weeks. But when I found you on that trail and said your struggle ends today, I didn't realize I was making a promise I'd want to keep forever." His blue eyes were earnest as he continued, "I love you, Sarah Evanston. If you need time to be sure, I understand. But I know my own heart." Sarah's breath caught at the simple, heartfelt declaration. In St. Louis, courtships followed rigid protocols, stretching months or years before such words were spoken. Yet here, with the vast Wyoming sky above them and the ranch spread out before them, Thomas's directness felt right as essential and honest as the man himself. "I don't need time," she said, her voice steady with certainty. "I love you too, Thomas Quinn. Whatever comes next, I want to face it together." His smile could have outshone the sun. Without dismounting, he guided his horse closer to hers, leaning across to kiss her with a passion that left her dizzy. "Then marry me," he said when they parted. "Not someday, not after Blackwell's trial, soon. Be my wife, my partner in everything." "Yes," Sarah answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will." They announced their engagement that evening to Miguel and Alina, who responded with delighted but unsurprised congratulations. News traveled quickly through the scattered community around Green River, and soon neighboring ranchers were riding over to meet Thomas Quinn's Eastern bride-to-be. Sarah found herself warmly welcomed by most, though a few cast doubtful glances at her refined manners and city background. Could a St. Louis banker's daughter adapt to the hardships of ranch life? Thomas defended her fiercely, proudly telling anyone who would listen how she had walked halfway across Wyoming territory on her own. "She's tougher than she looks," he'd declare, his arm protective around her waist. "And smart as a whip besides." The wedding was set for 2 weeks, hence enough time for the necessary preparations, but soon enough to satisfy the eager couple. The local preacher would perform the ceremony at the small church in Green River, with a celebration to follow at the ranch. Alina took charge of helping Sarah prepare, insisting that even a frontier bride needed a proper dress. Together, they transformed one of Sarah's St. Louis gowns, which had been carefully packed in her carpet bag, into a wedding dress suitable for her new life. The pale blue silk was simplified, its elaborate bustles and frills removed to create an elegant but practical gown that would not look out of place in Wyoming. As the wedding day approached, Sarah threw herself into ranch work with renewed purpose, determined to prove both to herself and others that she could be a true partner to Thomas. She learned to ride better, to help with calving, to manage the 1,000 daily tasks that kept the ranch functioning. Though her hands blistered and her muscles ached, she found deep satisfaction in the work so different from the ornamental existence she had led in St. Louis. Thomas watched her efforts with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her one evening as he gently rubbed salve into her blistered palms. "I didn't fall in love with you for your ability to rope cattle." Sarah smiled, enjoying his tender ministrations. "I know, but I want to be useful, not decorative. Besides, I'm discovering I enjoy ranch life far more than I ever enjoyed society functions." The night before their wedding, as Sarah sat on the porch of the cabin that would soon be truly her home, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. 3 months ago, she had been a grieving daughter fleeing for her life. Now she was about to become a rancher's wife, her future stretching before her as vast and promising as the Wyoming sky. Thomas joined her, sitting close enough that their shoulders touched. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, only half joking. Sarah leaned into him. "Not a single one. You, only wondering how I got so lucky." He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "When I found you on that trail, I was just trying to help a stranger in need. I never imagined I was finding my future wife." "Perhaps some things are meant to be," Sarah mused, "though I could have done without the collapsing from thirst part." Thomas laughed, the sound warm in the cool evening air. "I'm rather partial to that part. Made me look heroic." "You were heroic," Sarah said seriously. "You still are, every day." Their wedding day dawned clear and bright, the September air crisp with the promise of autumn. Sarah dressed with Alina's help in the little church's back room, her hands trembling slightly as she secured the last buttons on her transformed gown. "You look beautiful, my hija," Alina said, using the endearment she had taken to calling Sarah. Thomas will be speechless. The small church filled with a surprising number of people, neighboring ranchers and their families, townspeople from Green River who had become friends, even Sheriff Wilson in a freshly brushed coat. As the simple organ began to play, Sarah took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. Thomas waited at the altar, looking so handsome in his best clothes that Sarah's heart skipped. His expression as he saw her approaching, wonder mixed with love and pride, was one she knew she would remember for the rest of her life. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, the couple exchanging vows and simple gold bands purchased from Green River's general store. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes and cheers from their assembled friends. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the evening, with music provided by a local fiddler and enough food to feed twice their number. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit, creating pools of golden light in which couples danced while children played tag between the adults. Sarah found herself overwhelmed at times by the genuine warmth of the community that had so readily embraced her. These people, many of whom had their own stories of starting over in this rugged territory, understood reinvention in a way her St. Louis acquaintances never could. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them, Thomas pulled Sarah away from the dancing, leading her to a quiet spot behind the cabin where they could see the stars. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "A wedding gift." He handed her a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a design of wildflowers. Inside lay a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a compass rose. "It was my mother's," Thomas explained as he fastened it around her neck. "She always said it helped her find her way to true happiness, even when the journey was difficult." His fingers lingered on the chain. "I thought it fitting for you, my brave traveler." Sarah touched the pendant, deeply moved by the personal nature of the gift. "It's perfect, thank you." Thomas drew her into his arms. "Whatever comes, Sarah Quinn, we'll face it together. Your struggles and mine, they ended the day we found each other." As husband and wife said goodnight to their last guests, Sarah realized that for the first time since her father's death, she felt truly at peace. The threat of Blackwell still loomed somewhere on the horizon, but it no longer defined her. She had found not just safety but love, not just shelter but a home. That night, as Thomas carried her across the threshold of the cabin that was now truly theirs, Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. The seasons turned, autumn yielding to a harsh Wyoming winter that tested Sarah's resolve but never broke it. The newly married Quinns settled into a rhythm of life together, each day bringing new challenges and discoveries. Thomas proved to be a patient teacher and an attentive husband, taking obvious pride in Sarah's growing competence with ranch duties. For her part, Sarah brought organization and fresh ideas to their operation, including keeping detailed breeding records that would improve their herd over time. Word came in late November that James Blackwell had been arrested in Chicago, attempting to access funds he had hidden there. Marshal Dawson's letter assured Sarah that the evidence against him was substantial, but reminded her that she would eventually need to testify. "We'll go together when the time comes," Thomas promised, holding her close as they read the news. "Face him together and put it all behind us for good." Christmas brought their first real test as a couple when a blizzard struck just as several cows went into labor prematurely. For 3 days, they worked around the clock in the freezing barn, saving all but 2 of the calves. Exhausted and chilled to the bone, they collapsed into bed on Christmas Eve with barely enough energy to exchange the simple gifts they had prepared for each other. "Not exactly the romantic holiday I planned," Thomas apologized, his voice slurring with fatigue. Sarah curled against his side, savoring his warmth. "It was perfect," she murmured. "We saved lives together. What better gift could there be?" In January, Thomas began work on their new house, a proper 2-story structure that would replace the cabin when completed. Despite the cold, he and Miguel laid the foundation and began framing the walls, working whenever weather permitted. Sarah would bring them hot coffee and food, offering suggestions on the layout that Thomas readily incorporated into his plans. 4 bedrooms. He questioned one evening as they reviewed his rough sketches by the fire. "That's ambitious," Sarah blushed slightly. "I thought, for the future, children." Thomas's face softened as he pulled her onto his lap. "Children," he repeated, the word filled with reverent hope. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Spring arrived with a telegram summoning Sarah to testify at Blackwell's trial in St. Louis. After much discussion, they decided Thomas would accompany her, while Miguel and his brothers watched over the ranch and continued work on the house. The journey east was Sarah's first time returning to civilization since her flight almost a year earlier. The noisy, crowded cities they passed through felt alien after the open spaces of Wyoming. Thomas, who had not visited a major city since before the war, regarded the bustling streets and towering buildings with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "How did you bear it?" he asked as their train approached St. Louis. "All those people packed together, the smoke and noise." Sarah shrugged. It was all I knew, now it feels. She searched for the right word. Confined. St. Louis brought a flood of memories, not all unwelcome. Despite the circumstances of their visit, Sarah found herself eager to show Thomas the beautiful parks and riverfront where she had spent happy hours as a child. They stayed in a modest hotel rather than her father's house, which had been seized as evidence in the case against Blackwell. The trial itself was grueling. For 3 days, Sarah testified about her father's discovery of the embezzlement, his sudden death, and the evidence contained in the ledger she had preserved. Throughout her ordeal on the witness stand, she drew strength from Thomas's steady presence in the courtroom, his unwavering support, a tangible force she could feel even without looking at him. James Blackwell, for his part, maintained his composure during her testimony, his face a mask of injured innocence. It was only when financial experts confirmed the fraud detailed in Edmund Evanston's hidden ledger that his facade began to crack. On the 4th day, as evidence mounted irrefutably against him, Blackwell finally locked eyes with Sarah across the courtroom. The hatred in his gaze sent a chill through her, but she held his stare without flinching, Thomas's hand warm in hers. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of guilty on all counts. As the judge pronounced a sentence of 20 years imprisonment, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the burden of fear and grief she had carried since her father's death. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for a statement from the heiress who brought down a banking empire, as one newspaper had dubbed her. Sarah declined to speak, eager to leave the public scrutiny behind, but the attorney handling her father's estate insisted on meeting with her before she departed. With Mr. Blackwell's conviction, your father's assets will be released from court supervision, he explained in his downtown office. The bank will need to be sold, of course, but there are substantial personal investments that remain untouched. You stand to inherit a considerable fortune, Mrs. Quinn. The news was not entirely unexpected, but the amount mentioned by the attorney left both Sarah and Thomas momentarily speechless. That's a significant sum, Thomas finally said, his expression unreadable. The attorney nodded, pushing papers across his desk. Mrs. Quinn will need to decide how she wishes to manage these assets. Of course, given her new residence in Wyoming territory, it might be most practical to, we'll discuss our options and let you know, Sarah interrupted, sensing Thomas's discomfort with the attorney's presumptuous tone. Thank you for your assistance. As they left the office, Thomas was unusually quiet. Sarah waited until they were alone in their hotel room before addressing what she knew was troubling him. The money changes nothing, Thomas, she said, taking his hands in hers. It doesn't change who we are or what we want. Thomas sighed, sinking onto the edge of the bed. Doesn't it, though? You're a wealthy woman now, Sarah, wealthy enough to do anything, go anywhere, buy a mansion in San Francisco or a townhouse in Denver. Why would you want to return to a half-built house on a struggling ranch? Sarah knelt before him, making him meet her eyes. Because that half-built house is our home, because that struggling ranch is our dream, and because I love you, Thomas Quinn, not your bank account. She placed her hand on his cheek. The money is a tool, nothing more. We can use it to build the life we want together, improve the ranch, help our neighbors, maybe even start that breeding program you've talked about. Slowly, the tension eased from Thomas's shoulders. You're really not tempted to stay in civilization, even a little. Sarah laughed, rising to sit beside him. After a week in this noisy, smelly city, not in the slightest, though, she added thoughtfully, I wouldn't mind ordering a proper bathtub for our new house, and perhaps some books. Thomas pulled her close, relief evident in his embrace. A bathtub and books. I think we can manage that." They returned to Wyoming with the legal matters settled and plans for their future taking clearer shape. Sarah arranged for her inheritance to be transferred to a bank in Cheyenne, insisting on maintaining control of the funds rather than placing them in Thomas's name, as was customary for married women. To his credit, Thomas supported her decision completely. "It's your father's legacy," he said. "You should determine how it's used." Their return to the ranch coincided with summer roundup, immediately immersing them back in the rhythms of their chosen life. Sarah was surprised by how eagerly she dove into the hard work after weeks of city comforts, finding satisfaction in physical labor that no amount of luxury could provide. The new house was completed by early fall, a handsome structure of local stone and timber that combined Thomas's practical knowledge with Sarah's aesthetic sensibilities. As promised, it featured a copper bathtub and a dedicated washroom, along with built-in bookshelves that Sarah gradually filled with volumes ordered from Denver and San Francisco. Most precious to both of them was the nursery, prepared with hopeful anticipation and furnished with a cradle Thomas carved himself during the long winter evenings. Their hopes were realized in the spring of 1880, when Sarah discovered she was expecting their first child. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Thomas became increasingly protective as Sarah's condition advanced, insisting she reduce her workload despite her protests that she felt perfectly capable. "Humor me," he would say, guiding her to a chair on the porch. "I waited a long time to find you, Sarah Quinn. I intend to keep you and our child safe." Their son was born on a crisp November day with Alina serving as midwife and Thomas pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door. When finally allowed in, he approached the bed with reverence, gazing in wonder at the tiny bundle in Sarah's arms. "Meet your son," Sarah said, her face glowing with exhausted joy. "Edmund Thomas Quinn." Thomas's eyes filled as he carefully took the infant, cradling him with hands that could break a wild horse, but now touched his child with infinite gentleness. "Hello, Edmund," he whispered. "Welcome to Quinn Ranch." The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. The ranch prospered under their joint management, growing from Thomas's initial 2,000 acres to nearly twice that size. With careful breeding and sound business practices, their herd became known throughout the territory for its quality. Emma Rose joined their family 2 years after Edmund, followed by twins Michael and Matthew in 1885. The house that had once seemed ambitiously large soon echoed with children's laughter and the inevitable squabbles of siblings growing up together on the frontier. Sarah never regretted her decision to use her inheritance to build their life in Wyoming rather than return to city comforts. She found purpose not just in motherhood and ranch work, but also in helping establish Green River's first proper school and library. Though she occasionally missed certain aspects of Eastern culture, the community they had built filled those gaps with different but equally meaningful experiences. Thomas, for his part, blossomed as both rancher and family man. The quiet, somewhat solitary cowboy who had once been content with his own company now thrived at the head of a growing family and expanding ranch operation. His neighbors elected him to the Territorial Cattlemen's Association, a position of respect that would have been unimaginable to the young man who had arrived in Wyoming with nothing but dreams. News of James Blackwell faded into the background of their busy lives. He died in prison in 1887, a fact noted by Sarah with more relief than satisfaction. The past had lost its power to frighten her, becoming merely the path that had led her to happiness. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Thomas surprised Sarah with a journey to the Pacific coast the vacation they had once idly discussed on the porch of his small cabin. For 3 weeks, they explored San Francisco and the California coastline, marveling at the ocean's vastness and enjoying rare time alone while Alina and her daughter cared for their children back home. Standing on a cliff overlooking the Pacific, Sarah slipped her hand into Thomas's, the compass rose pendant still hanging around her neck after all these years. "Was it worth the wait?" she asked. "Seeing the ocean at last." Thomas looked down at her, the lines around his eyes deepened by years of squinting into the Wyoming sun, his face weathered but handsome as ever. "Everything good in my life has been worth waiting for," he replied. "Especially you." As they watched the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and crimson, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. From the desperate young woman collapsing on a dusty trail to the confident wife, mother, and rancher, she had become. It was a transformation she could never have imagined in her darkest hours. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, noting her contemplative expression. Sarah smiled, leaning against his solid strength. "I was remembering what you said when you found me on that trail. Your struggle ends today. You couldn't have known how true those words would become." Thomas pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Best promise I ever made. And I intend to keep it for the next 50 years. "Only 50, Sarah teased, her heart full of love for this man who had saved her in more ways than one. "To start with," Thomas amended with a grin. "We can renegotiate terms after that." As they turned to walk back to their hotel, Sarah took one last look at the endless horizon where sky met ocean. Their life in Wyoming offered its own kind of vastness, open skies, boundless possibilities, and love that had only deepened with each passing year. The banker's daughter, who had once lived a confined existence, had found freedom in the unlikeliest place. A dusty trail where a cowboy had kept his promise, and her struggle had truly ended.